It's time for Rockin Company's Rockin CU, featuring Adam Munsterteiger at buffstampede.com. And Rockin Company, historic and modern masons, general contractors, big CU supporters, and they sponsored this segment since we've been on the air the last 4 years. 5 decades, 2 generations, build it with rock. Build it with Rockin Company, rockinco.com, and Zadie's Deli. When you eat, you want delicious food, and was down there last week with friends. Generous portions. If the food's delicious, believe me, I want generous portions. In Cherry Creek at Zadie's Deli. Free parking front and back at 121 Adams Street. And their catering business is spectacular, Zadie's Deli. And Adam, we welcome you to the show. And I took a little bit of a caution from you and a beating on Twitter for suggesting that the Buffs, however slim their chances, are one of the 13, 14 teams that are actually alive with a route to the college football playoffs. That's not to say they'll get there. But here, the national polls kind of backed me up, rated the Buffs at number 15. And we all know that last year at this time, Ohio State, or 2 years ago, Ohio State was rated 16 and wound up not just in the playoffs, but winning the national title.
Yeah, I'm still not on board with you there, Michael. I do think the 15th ranking from the College Football Playoff Committee does show they do a little bit more research than the AP voters. I think if you had sat down and actually watched this football team through their first 8 games, you would have seen that they were more like a 15th ranked team than they were in the 20s, which is where they're 21 in the last week's AP poll. So definitely shows they do a little bit more research. Unfortunately for Colorado, they finally get on national television, and while they do win by 10 points, they played quite an ugly football game against UCLA. So they didn't necessarily have their best showing on the stage they had Thursday night.
I don't think it'll hurt them in the college football playoffs. I don't think there's anybody behind them that's going to catch them this week anyway. And I'm not saying Colorado will make it in, and I'm not saying they deserve to make it in, and I don't give them much of a chance if they hopefully do get to the championship game against Washington. I like Washington's one of my Final Four teams preseason, and I haven't backed off of that one bit. So we come to the question, Mark, and I want to ask you, Mark Kislev joining us as well, is how good are the Buffs?
Well, they're good enough to play ugly football, turn the ball over 4 times, have 12 penalties, 4 personal foul penalties, and they still win a football game against a conference opponent by 10 points. This obviously is not a program that could have had the performance they had like they did on Thursday night and come away with a win any time in recent years. It's been a long time since they've had the type of team to do that. And it was frustrating. I think the officials could have done a much better job of taking ownership of that football game. It seemed to get out of control, especially in that third quarter. UCLA's kind of gotten this reputation now for being kind of a dirty team here all of a sudden. But just going back to Colorado, I think it's pretty clear that they're in the driver's seat now in the South. They have a full game lead over Utah in the South. I'm still a little bit more nervous about USC in that Pac-12 South race just because of the fact that USC obviously has that tiebreaker over Colorado. USC does still have to play Washington, so they're in the driver's seat. I think that 15 ranking right now is pretty much where they sit. I feel like they're good enough if they bring it all together, like we kind of saw through the first 2.5 quarters at Michigan. They can compete with anybody if they're on their game, but they're not quite playing consistently enough to be considered in that top echelon. But certainly, I would say right now, probably the second best team in the conference.
And I would go not quite that strongly, even though I'm on record here as talking about national title contention. I think USC is actually a better team at this point. Doesn't mean it'll end up that way, and doesn't mean that USC will catch the Buffs and go to the championship game. Mark, why don't you weigh in? Do we have Mark? Maybe we've lost Mark for a second here. So, Matt, I'm going to give Matt Smith, who sat next to me from 5280 Sports and formerly did the play-by-play up at CU, for predicting this. As we started the second half, I'm sitting there, he goes, the Buffs are going to push UCLA around in the second half, and they're going to put – and they did, and they dominated the second half, and they put points, but they didn't put points up on the board, but they dominated really both sides of the ball in that second half. And I was thinking, while we're watching that second half, what a difference, because it was in the second half in all of the previous games the last 3 years where other teams kind of woke up and said, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then suddenly pushed the Buffs around. And the the changeover in the Buffs and their fortunes this year. Maturity, strength, a terrific defense, especially against the pass, have really turned things around. For me, the mainstay for all that toughness is the two lines, the offensive and the defensive line, have changed their fortunes.
Yeah, and in terms of them really waking up in the second half, there was quite a stern message sent to the players at halftime of that football game. I don't know how much of that played into it, but I think the message from the coaches got to the players in the second half. Yeah, the experience is definitely showing up on the lines. I think the offensive line still at times a little bit inconsistent in terms of pass protection, but definitely they've made huge strides from last year. Defensive line, you got to enjoy it right now because those guys are all seniors that start up on that group, and that's going to be the biggest challenge for them looking ahead to next year is replacing all those guys. Josh Tupou is not getting much recognition from the casual college fan, not recognition outside of Boulder, but that guy has played great football this season, and he's kind of the heartbeat of that whole defense. When you have run a 3-4 scheme and you have that nose tackle role, they don't make a whole lot of plays, but he's taking on blockers and making Kenneth Olobode look at times like an All-American out there. So he's been kind of the unsung hero for this football team.
I think defensive line is the number one strength of this team. Tupou and Carroll both, although Cafavalo's done a good job. And when they've called on him off the bench, Frankie and Coleman give you a little hope for next year in terms of having to replace that entire line. But two guys like Tupou are just hard to find. Special teams, huge step up. Isaiah Oliver, a punt return star, is born. The way he started up the middle, brought the defense in, and cut outside was brilliant.
Yeah, he's an amazing athlete. He's a decathlete. Was not able to really practice a whole lot for track because of spring practices, and he jumped right into competing in the Pac-12, and he made the Pac-12 meet last year, basically with little practice as a decathlete. So amazing athlete. You might wonder why was he not back there earlier. And McIntyre talked after the game about he just was not consistent catching the football. They always knew he was the athlete back there if he could just consistently catch it, and something he's continually worked on. Of course, Jay McIntyre struggled in that role in the Arizona State game, and now that Isaiah Oliver's shown in games that he can be trusted back there, I think he's going to have that job going forward. I don't think there's any question about that.
Real quick before we get back to picking up our following of the recruiting up at Colorado for football in particular, will they get their freshman kicker back next week from mononucleosis?
Yeah, Davis Price was actually cleared right before game time, and if you were looking down on the field, he was actually warming up, but McIntyre said they decided to not – it was more of an emergency situation in that game because he hadn't been practicing all week, so they didn't want to kind of – it's probably not fair to the kid if he wasn't able to kick during the week in practice to throw him out there, but I would expect him to go back in there. Chris Graham just is not consistent enough. You saw with that last one that got blocked. He has a tendency sometimes to kick really low, and he's really struggled.
Yeah, real quick, recruiting. A lot of 4-stars have looked at Colorado, and they're all skill players. Some have committed coming up, but Greg Rogers is a defensive tackle, a 4-star out of Las Vegas. He's going to make his announcement on November 16th. Colorado, Arizona State, Oklahoma, UCLA, USC are near the top there. What are Colorado's chances?
I would caution Colorado fans not to, at this point, to expect him to pick Colorado. It sounds like he's leaning away from Colorado at this point, which is a little disappointing. Keep an eye on Damian Daniels, a nose tackle from Texas, who's going to decide between Nebraska and Colorado. He's actually going to come out for the Washington State game.
Wow, very good. And then they got their first commitment for 2018, Ray Robinson, Highlands Ranch safety. He's Adam Munsterteiger. Adam, thank you. BuffStampede.com, must reading. Check it out. Be a subscriber. Check them out. Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
Rockin Company's Rockin CU, brought to you by Zadie's Deli. I guess what we'll start out with here is what we started the show with is, in this hour is how good is the University of Colorado, ranked number 15 nationally in the college football playoff ranking?
I think that Adam Munsterteiger put it very well to you, and I agree with him to a large extent. Before this UCLA game, Coach McIntyre, Mike McIntyre, had put out the idea that, hey, we are at CU a very good football team, but we're not a great football team. And we get to see now over the final weeks of this regular season if we can go from good to great. I agree with that entirely as well. CU is a very good football team. I thought this was a team that had a real chance to be 7-5 this year, to go to a bowl game for the first time in forever, and now they look like a 9-win team to me. So they richly deserve to be ranked in the top 25. I was very encouraged when they blew out Oregon State. I was very encouraged when they handled Arizona State very easily. But you see when they have turnovers, like most teams, it's hard for them to overcome that. And unlike Alabama or Michigan got off to a very slow start against Colorado and then came roaring back and on special teams dominated Colorado in the second half and won going away. That's the difference to me between a great team, a legitimate contender for the college football playoff, and a team that makes your alma mater proud, makes you as an alum proud, but isn't a serious candidate at this point to play in the Final Four.
Now, that is a great point on Michigan. There's some problems with special teams, and we talked with Adam, too, about how the special teams are getting better at CU. Isaiah Oliver, an emerging a punt-returning star, is born right there. And, of course, they'll have their best kicker, their freshman walk-on, back next week. But even Graham did a good job.
I'm concerned that with a couple huge games for the Buffs coming up in Washington State and Utah, to think that they might lose one of those games because of special teams. I mean,
yes,
there's been, one of those two games, if not both of them, is likely to be a 2 or 3 point game in the fourth quarter. And if I'm Mike McIntyre right now, I as a journalist, I don't like to criticize college athletes for their performance on the field, but if I'm Mike McIntyre and I send out my field goal team this year, I don't know if I can watch. I may just turn my back the other way and listen to the crowd and let the crowd tell me whether that field goal is good or not.
Chris Graham really stepped up and did a good job against UCLA, and of course the first-string kicker will be back next week. That'll help Colorado. I want to give you credit. Right after the Colorado State blowout, you said, no. This Colorado, you saw it right away. This Colorado team is good. They have a big upside. This team is for real. You haven't been the favorite columnist in Denver for all Colorado fans at all times. But, you were on this team early. You were much more positive early on even than I was. Changing gears on our weekly countdown here on who's in the college football playoffs. A bunch of teams have dropped out. There's no longer any group of 5 teams available with Boise State losing because Western Michigan, while unbeaten, will not have any quality wins to be considered. But there are 4 teams, Power 5 conference teams, that, we've got, I guess we say, 7 teams realistically with a playoff chance here. 4 Power 5 unbeatens, Alabama, Washington, Michigan, and Clemson can control their own fate. 3 one-loss teams can control their own fate, perhaps without any help, that being Ohio State, Florida, and by virtue of being ranked number 4, Texas A&M. So that makes 7 teams. Among the 11 teams that are barely breathing but still alive as we drop Florida State, Tennessee, and add a few, given what the poll said, there are 4 one-loss teams that can win their power conference: Nebraska, Baylor, West Virginia, and, of course, Oklahoma has 2 losses and can be an unbeaten team there as well. There are 7 Louisville is a team that probably can't get to the ACC title game. But if there's an implosion with 2 lost champions, they could be chosen as the number 4 team in the playoff without winning a conference champion. So I think they're still alive. And there are 7 2-power loss teams. Oklahoma can win the Big 12 and go unbeaten in the conference. Wisconsin, Penn State, Colorado, Utah, Auburn. And if LSU was to beat Alabama tonight, you'd have to take their chances seriously as well.
I haven't done the matrix on the remaining games for each of the contenders. To me, it seems clear to me that the top 3 teams deserve to make it. Doesn't mean they will earn their spot in the Final Four, but I think the top 3 teams, Alabama, Clemson, and Michigan, are definitely the top 3 teams in the country. I think Ohio State's down. I think Michigan will find a way to win that game. I reserve my right to change my mind, 2 hours before kickoff. But right now, those are the best three teams. I don't think Washington will go undefeated. I don't think Texas A&M will remain number 4. So I do think some team will come from off the pace, as it were, to get that 4th spot. If Ohio State were to beat Michigan, well, then Ohio State is certainly a contender to be in that Final Four. But I think the 4th spot's up for grab, and the top 3 are pretty well nailed down unless we have an unexpected stumble. Heck, I guess Alabama could lose today against LSU, but I don't expect that.
Bruce Marshall telling us Alabama usually stumbles. Nobody goes through the SEC unbeaten doesn't mean they won't emerge on top as well, and LSU could be the team they stumble against at night down there in Baton Rouge in Death Valley. I as a guy who went to many colleges in America, but spent more time at Ohio State than any of them, I don't usually agree with Jim Harbaugh, but he tweeted, "I'm disappointed to learn the Big Ten has chosen to infringe on Friday night high school football. We should promote rather than create obstacles. The Big Ten choosing to do 6 Friday night games per year. Penn State and Ohio State have already said they won't host games. Penn State says they'll play 1 Friday night away game max a year." Larry Scott in the press box at the Colorado-UCLA game said, when asked about the Friday night choices here, said that some of our schools prefer Friday night to Thursday night games, and it's just kind of a school-by-school thing. He wasn't aghast at the idea, but I don't like Friday night college football.
I know there are fans out there, sports fans out there that say, hey, if I can sit down and watch a game, an Ohio State game or a Colorado game on a weeknight, I'm all for it because that gives me more fun in my life. The same overexposure that the NFL has had, college football has, is in danger of getting to that point. And so, no, I'll be honest. I don't like Thursday night games. I don't like Friday night games. I don't like the Pac-12 games that begin at a god-awful hour on the East Coast.
Really?
It's not East Coast bias, you knuckleheads. It's the fact that the Pac-12 plays football games when people are out at the bar or they're asleep. So that's why Christian McCaffrey, I'm not saying he would have won the Heisman a year ago. He would have had a lot better chance if the Pac-12 played all of its games at a time that people could watch, that Heisman voters watched the games, or could at least check their iPhone to see, there's another touchdown run by Christian McCaffrey.